1887. Near Miles City, Montana. The land stretched flat and unforgiving brown and silver under a sky smeared with dying light. Dry wind ran along the prairie like it had someplace better to be. It whistled low, tugging at the broken boards of an old wagon tipped sideways in a ditch just off the trail. The wheel had snapped clean through sometime around midday. The sun had punished them for it ever since. The woman sat with her back to the wagon, arms curled around her knees, hat long gone. Her dress was dirt-smeared and stuck to her skin. Sweat trickled past her ears into her collar. Her name was Clara, and she had not spoken for nearly an hour. Words seemed too heavy. Behind her, 3 children lay in the shade of the wrecked wagon, too hot or too scared to cry anymore. The oldest, a boy of 9, had taken up the job of fanning his little sister with a square of torn canvas. He hadn't asked for permission. He just did it the way children sometimes carry the weight of things they should never have to. Clara's lips were cracked. Her hands ached from the fight she'd lost with the wagon wheel earlier. She had tried to brace it with a rock and a length of rope, cursing her own uselessness. The rope snapped. The wheel gave way, and the prairie had watched it all in silence. Her horse had bolted 2 hours ago when the axle failed for good. She didn't blame it. Somewhere just past that bend in the land where the sky kissed the earth, there was supposed to be a ranch, or a town, or a creek. That's what the map said. But the map was in the dust, now blown from her hands in the wind and trampled in the scramble to stop the wagon from rolling. She couldn't cry anymore. That had been used up in Kansas in the night she ran carrying 3 sleepy children, and what little money she had in a flour sack. A man had shouted from the porch behind her. He didn't follow, not then. But she knew he'd look eventually. A cloud passed overhead, long and slow, casting a shadow over the broken wagon. It felt like a hand resting on her shoulders for a moment. She looked up. The sun was dipping low now, orange and red and cruel. Night would come fast on this stretch of prairie, and it came hard. The boy cleared his throat behind her. "Mama." Her voice broke when she answered, "Yeah, I think May's too hot." Clara stood. Her knees gave a little. She pressed a hand to the wagon's side and breathed through her teeth. She'd left everything behind for a chance. A scrap of land, maybe. A place where no one knew her name. Somewhere quiet where her daughter wouldn't wake up screaming and the boys wouldn't flinch at sudden movement. And now here they were. A busted wheel, no horse, no water left, and dusk creeping in. She tried to count how far they'd come since sunrise. Maybe 12 miles, 13. She'd felt hope around 10, thinking she'd seen fence posts on the horizon. Turned out to be dead trees. The boy stepped out from the wagon's shade, face drawn and serious. "We gonna stay here tonight?" Clara looked at the sky again. Her throat worked, trying to swallow down the fear. "I'll walk. Just a little further. Might be someone close." He didn't argue. He just nodded and turned back toward his siblings. Clara tore a strip from the hem of her skirt and tied it over her head to block the sun. Then she started walking. Each step kicked up dust. She didn't look back. She thought about what might happen if she didn't find anyone. She didn't let herself think about it long. The prairie was so quiet it rang in her ears. Then came a sound sharp and dry. Hoofbeats. She stopped cold, turned slow. A rider was coming from the west, silhouetted in the sun, long coat flapping against the saddle, his horse moving with a steady confidence. Clara's knees almost buckled again, but she stood her ground. The wind lifted her skirt and blew dust in her face. She squinted. The rider slowed, then stopped a few yards off. He said nothing at first, just took her in her blistered hands, her cracked lips the hollow under her eyes. Then his gaze shifted past her to the wagon and likely the children lying in its shade. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came. He took his hat off, nodded. "You look like you got trouble," he said quietly. Clara's eyes burned. She nodded once. He looked toward the sinking sun, then back at her. "Well," he said, swinging down from the saddle, "let's get to work." He said his name was Eli Coulter, and his voice was calm in the way of men who've known fire and didn't run from it. He walked past her without asking more questions, boots stirring the dry earth, and knelt by the wagon to check on the children. Clara followed slow, unsure if her legs could carry her that far again. Her mind was still caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. She kept expecting the moment to vanish, for him to blur into the heat waves and disappear like a ghost, like a cruel mirage. But he didn't. He was flesh and dust and sweat and purpose. He lifted the little girl into his arms without fuss and passed her his canteen. "You'll need water too," he said, glancing at Clara. "I got more in my pack. Not a lot, but enough to get you through tonight." Clara took a slow drink. The warm water tasted like rust and leather, and it made her throat burn. She didn't care. "I got a place just 4 miles west," he added. "Coulter Ranch. Not much, but it'll do. You can rest there." 4 miles. Might as well have been 40 with the shape she was in. Still she nodded. "We'll go." He looked at the busted wheel, then at the children. "They can ride. You walkin' or ridin' with me?" Clara's pride said walk. Her body said otherwise. "I'll ride." He packed them all slow and careful. The older boy held tight to his little brother in front of him in the saddle. The girl sat in Clara's lap, her face tucked against her neck. Clara could smell the sun in her daughter's hair. She held on with all she had left. Eli walked beside the horse the whole way, hand on the bridle. He didn't speak unless spoken to. "Why'd you stop?" Clara asked once low, so the children wouldn't stir. He didn't look up. Saw the wagon from the ridgeline. Looked wrong. She waited. He didn't explain further. Silence settled again, but it wasn't harsh like before. It was quieter, softer. The kind that left space for your thoughts to move in. Clara hadn't been in a saddle for years. Her legs ached. Her back was screaming, but she didn't let go. Her mind drifted to Kansas, to the life she'd dropped like a scalding pan. The preacher had married them in a small white church when Clara was just 17. Her husband, Charles Heller, was respected in town, which meant nobody asked questions when his wife walked with a limp or stayed home from church. She'd prayed once for God to change him. Then she prayed for God to change her. But God hadn't done much either way. It wasn't until her oldest boy, Sam, had taken a blow meant for her that something in Clara split clean through. She left that night. A neighbor left out his mule cart by mistake, and she took it like it was hers. Rode east. Never looked back. She'd counted every coin, skipped meals, sold her wedding ring in Cheyenne for a half tank of grain. A stranger had told her there was land to be had in Montana if you were quick and quiet about it. She believed him. And now here she was. The sky had turned violet. The moon slid up over the hills like it was ashamed of being late. Somewhere a coyote called out sharp and lonely. Eli didn't flinch. "You live alone?" Clara asked, her voice rough. "Since my father passed." She hesitated. "No, why?" He shook his head. "Tried once." She left. No bitterness in the way he said it, just a fact. Clara looked away, eyes stinging. "Never mind," she murmured. He didn't press her. By the time they reached the ranch, her legs had gone numb. She didn't even remember dismounting. Just Eli's arm steadying her, guiding her through a low gate toward a house built of timber and stubbornness. Inside it was warm. A wood stove burned steady. The air smelled of coffee grounds and smoke. There were blankets stacked near the hearth, clean enough, patched in places. Clara sank onto the floor with the children, wrapped them in quilts, checked their foreheads. All breathing, all safe. "You can take the cot," Eli said. "I'll be in the barn." She looked up at him, eyes swollen, lips pressed tight. She couldn't speak the thank you, but he nodded like he heard it anyway. He stepped outside, and Clara wept. These roads are unforgiving, but they are honest. Subscribe and keep traveling where stories are paid for in sweat and hope. Morning bled slow across the sky, pale gold through the frost-furred window. Clara stirred beneath the quilt, every muscle in her body groaning in protest. Her daughter's breath tickled the hollow of her neck, soft and even. She rose quietly, layered the girl in another blanket, and stood. The wooden floor was cold under her feet. Through the window she saw the barn door open, and the rancher already at work, shirt sleeves rolled, pitchfork in hand, his breath fogging in the air. No questions, no demands, no warning looks. He'd just let her stay. She stepped outside into the cold, pulling the shawl tight around her shoulders. Her boots sank into the frozen mud as she crossed to the barn. Eli paused when he saw her resting the pitchfork against a beam. "Coffee on the stove," he said simply. "I'll help," she replied. He gave a short nod. Clara didn't ask what to do. She found the broom, the feed sack, the rhythm. The animals moved around them, mule, 2 cattle, a dog too old to bark, but loyal enough to follow Eli from stall to stall. "You plan to settle near here?" he asked after a while. "If I can," she said. "I was told there's claim land west of the river." "There is," he said, "but water's poor. Winters hit hard. I can manage." He studied her then, not rudely, just steady. "You don't look like you had much choice." "I didn't." Eli turned back to the feed bin. "Then you'll make it. Folks who choose this life usually don't last. Folks who don't choose it, somehow they do." Clara held that in her chest a long moment. The work filled the hours. She washed the children's faces at the pump, watched her boys help carry wood like they wanted to be useful. The little one chased chickens and fell in the dirt laughing. The girl found a place near the stove and watched Clara's every move with wide, quiet eyes. By noon, Eli had offered bread and smoked meat from a cellar behind the barn. They ate under the porch roof, the wind brushing past, not sharp but present. He watched her carefully, not with hunger or suspicion, but with a kind of measured respect, like he was trying to understand how she'd come to be here without asking things she wasn't ready to say. She glanced at him between bites. "Why'd your wife leave?" Eli didn't answer right away. He set his cup down. "She thought the land was too quiet, that I was too quiet, wanted more than cattle and silence." "Did you?" He looked off toward the hills. "I wanted peace." That word hung between them. Peace. She could taste it in the air now, the stillness of a place that didn't expect anything of her. "I was raised on shouting," Clara said softly, "and God talk. All of it had a weight. You carry that long enough, you start thinking you deserve it." Eli didn't look at her, just nodded slow. Later, when she took the laundry down to the creek, he followed without asking. Not close. Just enough to carry the heavy bucket to keep the children in sight while they played in the grass near the water. "You don't owe us this," Clara said. He set the bucket down. "You don't owe me thanks." She turned to him, hands raw from wringing clothes. "So why help?" Eli took a moment. His voice was low. "My father once said, if you see someone stranded before nightfall, you don't pass them by. Not out here. Not in this country." She blinked at him, throat tight. "Seems simple," she said. "It is," he replied. The children were laughing now, chasing each other, their feet wet, faces flushed with the first joy they'd known in weeks. Clara looked down at her hands. You think we could really make it that land past the river? You're here, he said. You got here without dying? That's already more than most. Clara looked up. His eyes met hers. Something quiet passed between them. Not promise. Not longing. Just understanding. And somehow that was more. The days began to stack one atop the other, stitched together by morning frostwork and the small rhythms of survival. Clara and the children stayed. Not because anyone said so, but because the land didn't object, and neither did Eli. He showed her how to split kindling with a firm, clean stroke, not wasting strength. How to pack flour in cloth to keep it from drawing moisture. He taught the boys to set snares and fix broken hinges. He didn't hover, didn't preach, didn't push. Just offered what he knew and let her decide what to take. Clara learned fast. Not because she had something to prove, but because there was no other option. If she was going to make a life in this country, she'd need to know its language, the feel of weather coming through the soil, the sound a horse made when something was wrong in the dark. She rose early each day before the sun had split the sky and stood in the yard while the wind combed through her hair. Some mornings, Eli stood nearby, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the same stretch of horizon. You ever miss the noise? She asked once. What noise? Town. People. Something other than this. Eli's mouth twitched, but he didn't smile. Sometimes I miss church bells. Not the sermons. Just the bells. Reminded me the day had started. Clara looked away. I miss the sound of my daughter breathing when she's not afraid. That's about it. He nodded. That's a good sound to miss. Their words were like fence posts, spaced wide, plain and solid. But they held a kind of shape together. Evenings settled gentle on the place. The children, full from stew and sun, tired, curled together on quilts. Clara mended clothes by lamplight, her needle moving steady. Eli read sometimes, mostly maps or old ledgers from when the ranch had been his father's. Occasionally she caught him looking at the children like he couldn't decide what memory they stirred. One night, as the wind howled outside and the lamp guttered low, Clara asked, "Did you want children?" Eli didn't answer right away. Then I did. What stopped you? He folded the ledger. I wanted to raise them in peace. She wanted to raise them in Denver. Clara set down the mending. What stopped you from going? This land belonged to my father, and his father before him. It was the only thing that stayed put. Clara understood that. The way some places anchor a person, even when everything else drifts. She thought of her own children, how they looked less hollow now, less brittle. How her oldest had started to hum again while he worked. She stood and crossed to the stove, poured him a fresh cup of coffee. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. He looked at her then, not past her, not through her, but at her. At the woman who had once been only a shadow on the road. Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can try. Why'd you really come out here?" She looked into the fire. The answer burned behind her ribs, raw and sharp. "I needed a place where no one could find me. Not even the version of myself I used to be." Eli nodded, like he understood that better than he wished he did. You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He took a sip, then shook his head. "I already left once. Fought in Tennessee. Marched through Georgia. I saw too much. Came back here and the dirt was still the same. It was the only thing that forgave me." That caught something deep in Clara's chest. Forgiveness that didn't have to be spoken. Just earned. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows like a restless animal, but the fire inside held steady. Later, when she climbed into the cot, she looked once across the room where Eli lay on the floor near the stove blanket pulled up to his chest. His breathing was even. His face in rest looked younger. Not unburdened, but reachable. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, not with fear but with a fragile kind of hope. Tomorrow would come, and with it, more work. But for now the house was warm, the children were safe, and she was no longer alone. Spring came slow that year. Snow melted in patches, pooling in the low ground while the wind still bit at the edges of dawn. Calves were born in the mud, stubborn and slick, and Clara learned to work through the cold with her sleeves rolled and her jaw set. Eli let her do more now, trusted her to mend fencing, to ride into the north pasture alone to barter with the traveling trader who came every few weeks. Trust had settled between them the way sunlight settles through dust, slow and certain. But peace, Clara had learned, was not permanent. It was earned daily and always at risk. The letter arrived in a saddlebag. Not for her. Addressed to Eli. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. A woman's hand. He read it in the barn. Clara didn't ask. She saw how still he stood after. Saw how his mouth pressed tight. He came in late that night, washed up, quiet, didn't touch his coffee. He didn't say anything for 2 days. Then one morning he found her hitching up the mule to fetch water. The children were still inside, still sleeping. He cleared his throat. "My brother wrote. Said they're selling off the family land in Nebraska. Wants me to come claim my part." Clara didn't look at him. "You going?" "I don't know yet." She nodded once. "You should go if you want to." He looked at her then. "It's not just about want." That was all he said. But something shifted after that. Not harsh, not angry. Just space. The kind that feels wider than it is. Clara felt the old fear again curling under her ribs like smoke. The feeling of waiting for something to end. Of being the one left behind. She tried to bury it. Focused on the days. Chopping, hauling, stitching, baking. She smiled when the children smiled. She let herself laugh when the dog chased its tail in the yard. But at night she lay awake, counting breaths and wondering where she would go next if he did leave. One afternoon a man rode up the trail. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven face like a blade. Clara knew before he said a word. "Clara Heller," he called, sitting high on his saddle. "You've been a hard woman to find." Her hands went cold. Eli stepped out of the barn, quiet and slow. He looked at Clara, then back at the rider. "That your husband?" he asked. Was. The man dismounted. He didn't draw a weapon. Didn't need to. His confidence was thick in the way he walked. "You think you can just disappear?" he said. "Take what's mine." Clara stepped forward, voice hard. "They are not yours. You left in the dead of night." "I had reason." He sneered. "You always did like making yourself the victim." Eli's voice cut through, low and firm. "You should leave." The man turned to him. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who'll bury you if you take another step." Clara's breath caught. She saw Eli's hand resting near the hatchet by the porch. Not on it, but close. The man studied him, smirked, then spit in the dirt. "This ain't over," he said. Then he turned and rode off slow enough to prove a point. Clara stood there long after the dust had settled. Her hands were shaking. Eli said nothing, just walked to her, laid a hand on her arm. Warm, steady. That night she packed a bag, left it by the door. Eli found it at dawn. "You think you still have to run?" he said, not accusing, just quiet. She couldn't meet his eyes. "I can't risk you getting hurt." He stepped closer. "You think I don't know what it is to be afraid?" Her voice cracked. "He won't stop. He's the kind of man who thinks he owns people." "I know the kind," Eli said. "My father was one." That made her look up. "I stayed with him too long," Eli went on. "By the time I left, I didn't know who I was. But I know now. I know what matters. He reached for her hand. Not forceful, just open. You have a choice, Clara. And I do too. I don't want to live scared. I want to build something that lasts. Tears welled hot in her eyes. You think we can? Ellie nodded. I think we already have. The man returned 3 days later. This time, he brought another with him, lean, mean-eyed, with a rifle slung careless across his chest. They came up the trail in daylight like they owned it, like the land wouldn't dare refuse them. Clara saw them first. She was in the garden bed planting onions, knees sunk into the earth. She froze, dirt still under her nails, heart thudding like hoofbeats in her ears. Eli was already moving. He stepped out of the barn with a slow, measured pace. No weapon in his hands, just his coat collar turned up against the wind. Clara stood. The children were inside. She didn't look back at them, just moved to Eli's side. The man who called himself her husband smiled wide and hollow. Told you I'd be back. Eli didn't blink. You brought a friend? He's here to make sure this goes smooth. That's so, Eli said, calm as a still creek. Smooth like stealing children. They're mine, the man snapped. Clara stepped forward. They don't even remember you. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were on Eli. You think she belongs to you now? Ellie's voice didn't rise. She doesn't belong to anyone. But she's with me. The man's hand twitched near his belt. The other one tightened his grip on the rifle. Eli, Clara murmured. I know, he said. Then louder he called out, you touch a child on this land and you'll answer for it. You think you're the first bastard to try and take what doesn't belong to him? The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to fight? Eli nodded. If you make me. The quiet that followed felt stretched tight as a wire. Then from the edge of the trees came a new sound, hoofbeats. More than one. Neighbors. 4 of them. Men Clara had seen only a handful of times at the edge of the fence lines. A woman, too, holding the reins steady, a shotgun across her lap. They rode up, slow, calm, but deliberate. One of them tipped his hat. Something wrong here, Eli. Eli didn't look away from the man in front of him. This one thinks he's taking something that doesn't belong to him. The rifleman shifted. He wasn't smiling now. The woman on horseback spoke next. We don't take kindly to thieves, or to men who don't respect other folks' choices. Clara's voice was clear. This is my home now. I'm not leaving it. The man stared at her, something sour behind his eyes. Then finally he turned to Eli. This ain't worth it, he muttered. And to his companion, let's go. The man with the rifle hesitated, then spit once into the dirt and followed. They rode off. No parting words. When the dust had settled, Clara's knees gave out and she dropped to the earth. Eli caught her before she fell all the way. The neighbors lingered only long enough to make sure the danger had passed, offering quiet nods and brief words of comfort, before returning to their own land, their own battles. Ellie helped her stand. He'll come back, she whispered. If he does, he won't be alone again, Eli said. This land doesn't protect cowards. It protects people who work it, who live honest. She looked at him through the tears. I was ready to run again, but you didn't. Clara let the silence settle. Then I want to stay. If you'll have me. Eli's voice was rough. You already belong here. The children ran out from the house, yelling and stumbling, asking what had happened if the bad man was gone. Clara knelt, pulled them close, her arms full of them, of noise and breath and warmth. Her eyes met Eli's over their heads. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. By midsummer, the earth had softened and the creek ran clearer. The garden rows stood tall with beans and squash, and the hens laid more regular now. The days were full, but the kind of full that made a person tired in a good way. Clara woke before the sun most mornings, not from fear, but because there was work to be done and peace in doing it. She'd stopped listening for hoofbeats in the dark. The children had changed too. Sam, the oldest, was carving wood, now small animals that sat along the windowsill. Daniel followed Eli like a shadow, trailing behind him with a small bucket and a serious face. May laughed louder, sang to the dog, carried wildflowers in her fists like they were treasure. There was a rhythm to their days, and it held. One morning Ellie handed her a box, wooden plane tied with a strip of rawhide. She opened it to find a silver band, not new but worn smooth. Inside the lid of the box was a single folded paper with just 2 words written, "If you're ready." Clara stood there in the open doorway, sun at her back, wind catching the hem of her skirt. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just nodded and held the ring in her palm like it was a promise she could finally trust. They were married in the clearing near the barn just past harvest. The neighbors came, brought jars of pickles, bread-cured meat. Someone played a fiddle. The children picked flowers from the garden and handed them to Clara one by one. She wore a blue dress someone had lent her. Eli wore his father's coat. They said the words with their hands joined and their foreheads nearly touching. There was no preacher, just a man and a woman and the land that had made them whole again. At dusk, when the last of the guests had ridden home and the porch was quiet but for the creak of wood and the chirr of crickets, Clara sat beside Eli, her head on his shoulder. "I used to think I'd never feel safe again," she said. "I used to think I didn't deserve more than quiet," he said. They sat a while longer, saying nothing, the kind of silence that didn't hurt. Later, Eli carried May to bed, her arms wrapped around his neck, her breath warm on his collarbone. Sam and Daniel had already fallen asleep near the stove. Clara stood at the door and watched him tuck the girl in. He was gentle, always had been, not just in touch, but in the way he looked at the world, like he expected it to break and still wanted to love it anyway. In the months to come, they'd build a second room on the house. They'd plant more rows, trade for a milk cow, talk about starting a school nearby, and come spring Clara would press Ellie's hand to her stomach one night, his brow lifting when he understood. He would cry then, not loud, just enough. They wouldn't say much about it, but everything in their life after would say enough. One day the children would ask about the broken wagon out near the edge of the land where the weeds grew tall through the wheels. And Clara would smile and say, "That's where we stopped running." The wind would blow through the grass. The house would stand steady, and the land, as always, would hold them all. Do not leave this fire unattended. Subscribe and return for the next tale carried in by wind and dust.